Report on a journey to the western states of North America and a stay of several years along the Missouri, during the years 1824 to 1827, by Gottfried Duden. 14th letter, Montgomery, September 1825. Part 2, number 20. When preparations have been made for the crops, the dried-up trees can be removed gradually and used as firewood. However, it is customary to plan the location of the fields when erecting buildings, preferably so as to select lumber from this area. Trees suitable for fencing are likewise cut down. The stumps soon rot, and in 12 to 15 years they have disappeared entirely. Of course, some trunks fall during heavy winds and others rot, but this does little harm to the crops, and there is no danger that cattle or people could be injured by their falling. There are too many dead trees in the forest for that. With ever strong wind, with prolonged heat without rain, during heavy rains, all of which cause loosening of the roots, one often hears within 24 hours more than 50 trees, close by or distant from the home, plunge to the ground with a terrible crash. Yet there is scarcely a case on record of domestic animals living in the open having been injured by them. Their alertness, especially that of the horses, is remarkable. In stormy weather they seem to avoid dead trees, and later, when they are ridden or used for field work, the slightest cracking noise makes them restless. The people, too, are not careless during a heavy wind and postpone working among dead trees. Very rarely is the cold said to interrupt outside work for more than 2 days. Even in January, the weather is not always unfavorable for removing the roots of brush. While horses, cattle, and hogs, not excluding the tenderest calves, can survive the winter without shelter, the climate cannot be too harsh. It is remarkable how quickly all these domestic animals become accustomed to their homestead. Milk cows are kept near their fenced-in calves. Therefore, when a cow is sold, its calf is part of the bargain. Calves are never slaughtered, partly because they grow up without any care or expense. During the first months, cows return to their young at least twice a day at definite times. Often they wait for hours at the fence until the gate is opened. Then they are partially milked and enclosed with the calves who feed on the remainder of the milk. Usually a little maize is fed to them during the milking period. Afterward they are driven into the open again to forage for their own food, which is not difficult for them. When the ground is covered with snow, they eat the tender twigs of the various shrubs. In such weather, the fields are also open to them so that they can eat the stalks and leaves of the harvested maize. The remaining cattle obtain their share also, and in addition receive several ears of maize. But it is said that they can survive the winter without any food supplied by man. The same is true of horses. Hogs also find so much in the forest that they become very fat and are not often seen during summer. As soon as it becomes cold, however, they return to the homestead, even if they have been gone for several months. They, too, are given maize to attract them to the homestead rather than to serve as nourishment. Only those that are selected for butchering are kept within fences and are generously fed in order to increase their weight more quickly. Small amounts of salt are excellent lures for horses and cattle. As soon as horses or oxen are used for work, however, they are also fed, even if only as a substitute for their lost grazing time. 10 to 12 ears of maize constitute a full ration for a horse, and 36 would be enough for the whole day without any supplement of hay or grass. 100 ears amount to about a bushel, and 50 to 60 bushels are usually harvested from a single morgen. A bushel of maize, in other words, a bushel of grain without the cobs, weighs about 55 to 60 pounds. The manner in which the domestic animals habitually return is the most surprising sight, especially for the European. Cattle and horses follow the bell of the herd's leader. Only cows that have calves are an exception. These are attracted at any time by the loud barking of a dog in the neighborhood of the homestead. Often one sees them running from distant forests toward the homestead in great fear for their young, and they do not calm down until they know that the calves are unharmed. At night they lie down outside the fence while their calves rest close to them on the inside. On bright, clear days the horses appear long after the sound of their hoofbeats has announced their coming, running at full gallop and leaping about wildly. They continue to frolic in happy abandon until they are given some food or salt. Sometimes one suddenly sees, after an absence of several months, several sows with litters of young, which have thereby increased the wealth of the farmer without his knowledge. When a settler has an insufficient supply of meat from his domestic animals, his hunting rifle will keep him supplied. Meat of domestic animals, to be sure, cannot be very expensive here. Beef costs only 1.5 cents, and pork 2 cents, 3 farthings per pound. But there is so much game, deer, turkeys, partridges, doves, pheasants, woodcocks, and so forth, that a good marksman supplies food for a large family without exertion. In the entire United States, hunting and fishing are entirely free, and anyone can hunt in areas not fenced in, how and whenever he pleases, with dogs, with nets, with traps, with guns, small game as well as large. The deer, of which here in the state of Missouri there are 2 kinds, are usually very fat. The meat is palatable, but the hunter rarely brings home the entire carcass. He is satisfied with the skin and the thighs of the hind legs and hangs the rest on a tree so that anyone else who so desires can help himself to a roast. Turkeys are found in herds of 20 to 50. Around Christmas they are usually very fat. Because I am not a good hunter, I have my neighbor deliver some every week, especially for soup. They must weigh at least 15 pounds before the hunter will even take them home. I pay 12.5 cents apiece for them. The bison, buffalo, has vanished from this region. He has moved farther north and west. One sometimes still encounters bears. Almost every evening I hear wolves howl, and yet sheep roam about without shepherds. Here the farmer suffers as little from beasts of prey as from robbers and thieves. However, there are complaints that from the end of April until the middle of May, young pigs are endangered by wolverines who give birth to their young at this time. Although horse breeding is so easy here, horses are nevertheless rather expensive, far more expensive than in the state of Ohio. A strong draft horse is often sold for $80 to $100. It is impossible to take advantage so quickly of all that nature offers. In New Orleans, butter usually costs more than $half a pound, and yet this high price has resulted in only a few shipments from the state of Missouri. The waterway, to be sure, is good enough. However, in order to produce much milk and butter, the cattle would have to be kept in barns at least temporarily, and this seems too inconvenient to a new settler. Grain, especially maize, and salted meat are sold in New Orleans at a great profit. The boats are built without difficulty on the banks of the Missouri. Whoever knows that the lands along and in the Gulf of Mexico annually import from Europe many shipments of provisions such as butter, cheese, ham, and flour, cannot fear a poor market here. Also, most of the horses raised here are sold in the South. At the beginning of an acreage of 4 to 5 morgen is sufficient for a small family. A half morgen may be used for garden vegetables, a second half morgen for wheat, although it is usually too late to sow it during the first fall. This leaves 3 or 4 morgen for maize. In the western regions of America, maize is a main product of agriculture. One could call it the wet nurse of the growing population. It serves all domestic animals as food, as it is used for fattening. The flour from it is simply called meal. On the other hand, the ground product of wheat is called flour. When boiled with milk, it makes a very nutritious, healthful, and palatable food. If it is kneaded with the boiled pulp of the pumpkin, however, a bread can be baked that I prefer to wheat bread, especially if the dough is fermented by subjecting it to heat for approximately 12 hours. A dough of cornmeal mixed with water or milk and then baked produces a bread that is too dry, but with fatty foods it is quite palatable. The bread is baked in covered iron pots, which are placed on a bed of glowing wood coals on the hearth and also covered with them. In most households, fresh bread is prepared every day, and in general, the cooking and baking are not very inconvenient because of the constant supply of glowing coals on the spacious hearth. Bread is also made of wheat flour. As well as I remember, the cornmeal is called groats in the Rhine region. There are many varieties of maize here. The most common varieties have white and yellow grains. There are also red and blue speckled ones, and some that are transparent like beautiful pearls. These variations are preserved by propagation. The meal from all of them is the same. The stalks grow very tall, 10 to 15 and even 20 feet. The garden provides the best European garden produce. Peas and beans flourish beyond all expectation. Only the finer varieties of beans are found. In order to require neither poles nor a special bed, they are usually planted in the maize fields, where the tall cornstalks serve as support for the vines. Pumpkins, lettuce, and several other things are planted there also. In this fertile soil, without the least fertilization, all these plants grow at the same time, just as luxuriously after 20 years as in the first ones. I assure you that there is no exaggeration in this statement, and that I have convinced myself many times of its truth. One of my neighbors, by the name of William Hancock, owns a farm on the banks of the Missouri that was started 20 years ago. Every year, without interruption, these areas have produced the richest harvest which no fertilizer can increase. In fact, the only change is that wheat can now be grown on fields that have been under cultivation for so long, whereas formerly it always fell over. However, some garden produce requires natural fertilizer. The farmer provides this in a very simple manner. He quarters his sheep overnight in the area intended for beds. Every year there is an abundance of cucumbers and melons, of course without any care. A good vegetable for the garden is the Duden, called sweet potato here. The common potatoes are called Irish potatoes. They require a long summer and probably would not develop well in Germany. Prepared and steamed, they taste like the best chestnuts. I like them very much with coffee in the morning, although so early I can rarely eat the fried meat that is usually served in addition. Like the cucumber, the plant has vines that spread over the ground. In the second year, cotton is raised also, however, north of the Missouri only for family use. On the whole, the American farmer tries to spend no money for food or drink or clothes, with the exception of real finery. Therefore, flax and hemp are cultivated, and a small herd of sheep is kept. The products are all made at home. The spinning wheel is found everywhere, and if there is no loom, the housewife or one of the daughters goes from time to time to a neighbor who owns one. Just as most men are skilled at making shoes, few women find it difficult to make not only their own clothes, but also those of the men. The demands of changing fashions are not ignored. After housekeeping has been organized and the first purchases have been paid for, the whole family lives a carefree and happy life without any cash. And this is the real reason small sums are less important here than in Europe. In Europe, when a husband brings home a little ready money, the wife immediately needs something, and usually there is no peace and quiet in the home until it has all been spent in the nearest store, usually for tawdry finery. The smallest coin is a silver coin worth 6 1/4 cents 9 farthings. One does not see copper coins in the western states. Cash is needed only for taxes. These, however, are so low that scarcely any thought is given to them.